It's time you considered Africa. That's right, African basketball is providing some of the most unique opportunities to overseas players across the world. So today I want to go over a few of those and see how you can benefit and maximize them. Now, in order to understand the power of the African passport, you have to understand how overseas basketball as a whole operates. So in FIBA, traditionally there are two types of players that are allowed on every roster. The first one are imports and the second one are nationals. Imports are players that are imported to the country, meaning they are foreign to the country. So let's give an example. If you were playing in Nigeria and you were American, then you are considered a foreigner or an import because you are not a native Nigerian. You do not have a Nigerian passport. Therefore, you count as an import or a foreigner. Now, on the other side of that are nationals or locals, we can call them. And those are just players who are native to the country in which the league is taking place. Now, in the vast majority of countries, imports and foreigners will only take up a few roster spots. So it's going to be limited and very, very competitive to be an import alone. And there are going to be more roster spots available for native players and locals on every single overseas basketball FIBA roster out there. Now, when you get to Europe, this is kind of flipped on its head because there are actually four types of players that are allowed in many of the European leagues. First one being a local player or a native player. Second one being a Bosman A player. Third one being a Bozeman B player. And fourth one being a Cotonou player. And that last one is what we are going to be focusing on for this video. Now, the Cotonou player are African or Caribbean passport holders, but similar to an EU player, where they share an agreement with all of the European Union states, there's actually an agreement that exists outside of basketball called the Cotonou Agreement. And this was signed in 2000 between 15 European countries and a large portion of African countries and Caribbean states. So what happens is that, similar to a Bozeman A player, Cotonou players have a special roster spot designated to them, meaning they are not a foreigner, they are not an import. And remember, foreigners and imports are always going to have the toughest path in overseas basketball because it's so fierce and there's so few roster spots available to them. Being a Cotonou player, you actually have a huge advantage, not only in Africa as a whole, as a local player, as a native player to whatever country you're from, but also to Europe. Now, obviously the big question is, well, what countries and what leagues actually recognize the Cotonou player? In Spain, they are one of the most longest standing countries that recognize Cotonou players. So you will routinely see players from Africa or who have African passports playing in Spain. Another one is France. France routinely recognizes this as well. As a rule of thumb, if you are looking to use your African passport and play under this Cotonou ruling, then I would look at countries that agreed with the Cotonou Agreement in 2000. So it kind of wouldn't make sense that somewhere like, let's say, Serbia or somewhere like Romania would recognize the Cotonou ruling because they weren't involved in the Cotonou Agreement, the broader Cotonou Agreement that existed outside of basketball. In North America, there are so many African Americans, African Canadians, Caribbeans, and so long as you have your passport, so long as you have an African or Caribbean passport, it doesn't matter that you weren't born in Nigeria, it doesn't matter that you weren't born in Jamaica, it doesn't matter that you weren't born in Angola. If you are American, Nigerian, then you can play as a Cotonou. So that's often what you'll actually see in these countries, is that you'll see Americans not playing as an import, but playing as Cotonous. And you'll have 2, 3, 4 of them on a team. So that is a huge hack for teams that they want to utilize in these countries. American players who come from NCAA Division I, that's gonna be tough to beat a lot of times. So these clubs know that and they kind of load up with these Cotonou players. Even though a lot of players idolize Europe and say that Europe is the top place where they want to land, I think the real value for African players, dual citizen African players, and even people who are just interested in African basketball is in Africa itself. It is not in Europe. And this is through something called the BAL, the Basketball African League. You can think of this like the EuroLeague of Africa. It has the top names, the top stadiums, the top clubs, and it's the top competition in the entire continent of Africa. And probably the biggest thing that has validated that is the NBA, because they actually funded and are pouring money into this competition. Now, with all of that being said, I think that if you're watching this video, it's probably going to be pretty tough for you to reach that level, because the players who are playing in that already are established, are high-level pros, they have agents, they have names, and they're probably not watching too many videos about overseas basketball and how to actually crack into these markets. So I say that to say that this is something to strive for, to aim for. Now, I have seen over the years, I have seen a lot of D2 guys get in here. I've seen low major D1 guys get in here. So it is definitely possible. I don't want to crush your dream on that, but it will take something to work up to. Now, if ball is something to strive for, then the thing that you should be looking at right now is the road to ball. And that is the qualification rounds to this competition. This is where I believe the real opportunity is for mid-tier, low tier, and even beginner players who are looking to get their beak wet in Africa. So the way this works, in ball, similar to the EuroLeague, there are few teams who are always routinely in the competition and they have their spots permanently secured. But there's a few other teams who actually have to qualify to play in ball. And this is why they have the road to ball, where you are actually trying to qualify into the competition. Now, in order to qualify, what happens is you have to win your domestic league first. Afterwards, you would get into this qualification round or this competition with 30 plus other teams in the road to ball. So you'd be playing teams from like Madagascar, Libya, a lot of different teams, a lot of different countries, and a lot of different coaches and agents who can watch you play and see what your game is all about. Anytime you get a bunch of teams and clubs and coaches together from different countries and different leagues throughout the world, that's when you can kind of cross over to other leagues. Because say you did well against one team from Angola, who's to say that they wouldn't be impressed enough by you to say, hey, we should sign that guy? Or at the very least, you have great film that you can then leverage. But beyond that, beyond being able to leapfrog yourself to the higher levels, another thing that will just benefit you a lot in the moment presently is the length of the road to ball. So let's say, for instance, you were playing in one of these pro leagues, the domestic league. So let's say that went for a few months and then you went to the road to ball. That road to ball process, depending on how you do, could be multiple months at a time. So now you're looking at 5 or 4 months maybe of potential work where you have steady income while you're not paying for any expenses, while you're not paying for food, and you're really able to kind of elevate yourself financially in that way. So that's where I think the real opportunity is when you think of the BAL. It isn't necessarily in the BAL itself, because it's such a high level competition. Of course, there's going to be some people who make it there, but if you can play and latch on to these road to ball teams and these leagues that are trying to qualify for the BAL, then that is something that can really elevate you, not only financially, but in your career as well. Now, helping you out even more in all of this is the fact that Africa and the road to ball actually allows African imports. So these are players who aren't from the country in which you're competing with or the league that you're competing with, but still have an African passport. So let's say, for instance, you were playing with a team from Libya, but you were South African. You would count as an African import. Now, similar to in Europe with the Cotonou, what happens is a lot of these teams actually look at dual national African import. And what they'll do is they'll try to pluck these Americans who are basically an import, but they're disguised as an African import. And I know lots of guys who have done this over the years, and it's so interesting because typically Africa has been kind of like a forgotten market for a lot of people, but now it is really establishing itself. And I think the validity of the NBA helped, but beyond that, the leagues and the competitions have actually improved. Rwanda, Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia. Now there's players. I have a friend who's making 15,000 per month in Senegal. He started at about 3,000. I know other guys who are making 10,000, other guys making 20,000. It's a lot of money to earn in Africa. It's just a matter of, can you establish yourself and can you rise to the level of the competition in this continent? For years, players only really thought of Europe when it came to overseas basketball, but now that's really changing. There are multiple continents in the world that can provide you with opportunities for salary, competition, exposure. So if you're interested in learning about those, then I recommend you click right here. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.